one of the challenging things with this type of a data breach is it relates to time, right? It's often very difficult for the parties involved to know when they were hacked, and then after the fact, it often takes time for them to then react or even publicly, tell people that the hack occurred, right? So how does that like impact these scenarios?
So time is a really interesting variable when it comes to these cybersecurity matters. So like as you mentioned, frequently companies don't know or only know later that they've been hacked. So then at that point, if something happened many years ago...
So it's not like in TV where it's like, I've been hacked and all the lights are going.
That's right.
Everyone's typing on the same keyboard at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe in certain situations that could happen. I don't know. But I imagine in a lot of situations, a company has been hacked, their data has been exposed, either intentionally or unintentionally, and they might not know about it for a prolonged period of time. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of that. Even the Mt. Gox situation that we talked about a few minutes ago is a situation like that where the hack might have happened years before. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around this time element, particularly when did it happen.
Yeah.
But then on the back end, let's assume the company has found out, whatever, a day later, the same day, whenever it is, then how do they react? I mean, it seems from some studies that on average that companies take at least 6 months to react and kind of figure out what their next step is. One challenge that companies have is that each of these companies that goes through this has very different capabilities. So certain companies, because they may have really good management processes, good leadership, good operational control, and teams that can if some sort of emergency situation comes out, then they have some sort of protocol that they go through. But there are a lot of companies, the reality is most companies are probably not really well managed and maybe don't know what to do when that happens. And then you have very interesting incentives that occur, particularly for listed companies. So companies that are publicly traded that have this kind of issue and, debates that occur probably at the highest levels, both in the boardroom as well as amongst the chief executive officer level about when they should reveal certain information. Should it be before a certain deadline in terms of quarterly cutoffs and things like that, because maybe they don't want to impact share price and so
or their job.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of incentives or disincentives that go into wanting to publicize or not publicize information as well. And so this is a great challenge that we have. And then it goes back to this, again, going back to the idea of who's in charge of protecting this data then, right? Because if somehow, whatever method the company has aggregated or compiled this data, then do they have a responsibility or a stewardship over that, right? And I think from an ethical perspective, we would say, yeah, right? If something has been left in your care, then you would assume that there'd be some level of responsibility to protect what has been left in your care. Now, it seems that that's not always the case from the behavior of business leaders.
Yeah, and one of the things, I mean, let's assume that North Korea was involved, let's just say, and it's not clear that they were. This is one of those cases that when it happened, it kind of brought home to me this idea that personal data is in many ways as important to national security as, say, a border might be. And I had never really thought about that before. So what are kind of the security implications from a data standpoint?
Yeah, so if we take a step back, there are a lot of people who feel data will be the fuel of not just fintech, but of perhaps the fourth industrial revolution. So, people talk about all the technological
you can't have
advances.
AI with lots of data.
That's right.
Yeah.
All of this will be empowered or further enhanced by large amounts of data. And so at the core, companies, large technology companies in the United States and in China, other places of the world, a lot of them are branching out and building very large platforms where users are participating on the platform through various different services that these companies offer. But at the heart of all of that is that these companies are now having the opportunity to get a more fuller or comprehensive view of usage, of data, and more richer data that can be used to kind of develop new products, but as well as develop profiles of people. Now, we already know that in China, for example, that at a government level, they're trying to develop social credit. So to tie into your question, that has very direct implications on aspects of how that credit or that data then may be used.
Yeah, national policy.
That's right.
There's examples of this where government officials have said they'll use this in determining visa rights.
That's right. Who can leave the country? Who can't leave the country?
What jobs you can get, what you can study in university, whether you can be a journalist, a lawyer, etc.